Good morning. I'm Andrew Solinger, publisher of Foreign Policy, and welcome to the first panel discussion of the MEI Futures Forum. I'd like to thank Richard Clark and James Christian Blockwood for that excellent start to the forum. I hope you tuned in. And FP is thrilled to be partnering with MEI on this event. We are hosting 3 future-focused panels this week with MEI. Tomorrow, FP Global Geoeconomics correspondent Keith Johnson will lead a discussion on the future of energy, featuring leading global energy experts. And on Thursday, FP National Security and Intelligence reporter Amy McKinnon will host a panel on the future of cities with 3 smart urban innovators. And I hope you tune in to those too. Please do join us then. But right now, I'll lead our opening panel examining how digital finance can be an important tool in the Middle East region's economic growth going forward. And here to discuss this with us is a fascinating group of experts. First, we have Ali El Husseini, the CEO of Medici Land Governance, a company whose mission is to apply emerging technologies to empower developing countries, governments at the local and national levels, specifically to verify and validate land rights for their citizens using blockchain. Very interesting business. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Brock Pierce, an entrepreneur and venture capitalist with an extensive track record of founding, advising, and investing in disruptive businesses. Brock is currently the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation. Welcome, Brock.
Glad to be here. And Ali, we should catch up on all of my state-based visits. I'm assuming you've been following some of what we've been doing in El Salvador, Ecuador, Panama, Honduras, etc. You may want to come on these trips.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that momentarily, Brock. And Ali is joining us from Zambia, actually, so we'll talk about that too. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have Sandra Rowe, the CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council, who is a proponent for human-centric technology. Her research focuses on emerging technologies for sustainability, access, and resiliency, particularly in financial systems. Welcome, Sandra. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. So this is going to be a conversation between the 4 of us, no presentations. And we want you to participate as well, attendees. So if you have any questions throughout the panel, please put them into the chat box or email your question to events@mei.edu, and we'll field them with the panelists as they arise. Okay, let's get started. I wanted to first offer a brief introduction into the subject of cryptocurrency and blockchain. It is currently a very hot topic at FP. Foreign Policy's research division, FP Analytics, is in the midst of publishing a research series on this subject. It's called the Future of Money Power Map, and it's focused on digital currencies, crypto, and blockchain. We review how this revolutionary technology will not just reshape finance, but also US dollar supremacy and its power as a tool for sanctions. We review and lay out the existing global payment systems, the rise and implications of central bank digital currencies like China's digital renminbi, the inner workings of blockchain, the state of the cryptocurrency markets, upcoming developments in stablecoin, and a country-by-country adoption and regulation chart on crypto. That's coming up next. We're about to release part 3 of this series this afternoon. And as a scene setter for today's discussion, I'd love to share an advanced excerpt with you. I was reviewing it last night in advance of this panel, and it's just a perfect preseat to what we want to talk about today. So, technological and geopolitical trends are converging to lead a widespread transformation within the international financial system, pushing it to be both more inclusive and efficient, as well as more competitive and unpredictable. The steady transition to a digital cashless economy, accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic and its lockdowns, combined with the development of transformational new financial technologies, is driving a range of institutions to re-examine core elements of the financial system. But this didn't actually start last year. The 2008 financial crisis was a major turning point and revealed serious flaws in existing financial system structure. It led to widespread mistrust of the commercial banking sector for many individuals, the creation of Bitcoin, and a wholesale rethinking of the international financial system. While the current system has been disproportionately favorable to the US, perceived sanctions overreach, financial exclusion, and other factors are driving some countries to seek alternatives. And today, it remains unclear whether cryptocurrencies will remain viable alternatives to existing fiat currencies, but their impacts are already undeniably reverberating throughout the financial system. And that's why it's a big deal for foreign policy. So as this technology is introduced into a geopolitical environment that's already exploring ways to move away from the current dollar-denominated status quo, a wide range of institutions are exploring how to effectively adopt and regulate these technologies. There is a ton more where that came from in our power map, but that's for reading later. Let's go to our experts and start diving in. Ali, I'd love to begin with you. Medici is a fascinating company focused on digitizing land records, as I mentioned, in Zambia and globally, New York City too, not just in developing countries. Some might argue that description of New York City, by the way. But I want to dive into that business a little later, if you'll allow me. I wanted to start out with your background as an executive board member of BITT, and how you tried to bring digital currencies to the Mideast region. Just wanted to talk about the Mideast region for a moment. And that was for both developed countries like the UAE, as well as troubled institutions and markets, the Central Bank of Lebanon, even Syria. Can you tell us a little bit about that effort? What was your motivation, and explain what you were doing there?
Thank you, Andrew, and pleasure being on this panel with these fine people. So for us at BIT, when we started, as we did the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank as a pilot, we were thinking, well, where does this technology work? It would work in a very volatile environment where most people are unbanked, or they don't have access to their capital, in the case of Lebanon. So we went to right before the crisis in Lebanon, we went to the Central Bank of Lebanon, and we said, this is something that is unique, cost of seigniorage, all these extra costs, and Brock will tell you with his work in Salvador, he's doing the same thing. It's something that every country should adopt, and US central bankers should look at it. There was a lot of resistance early on, and they were like, where are you coming from? This doesn't work. The American government will never accept this. We can't do this. People are going to do money laundering and such. And my motivation came as originally Lebanese. I saw my countrymen not being able to get money out of their bank accounts, and not being able to receive money from their cousins or family members, expats that, like myself, are now American living in the US, trying to send their parents money, and they can't do that because the bank won't give them the money. And Western Union will only give you the local denomination, which is now devaluated worse than Venezuela at 15, 16x the existing value. So we figured that this could be something that would be revolutionary, would make things easier, and will allow people to come in and do things differently. My interest as a political scientist background was I was always fascinated with what was happening with the region, with the Arab Spring and such. And I was always thinking, well, what's next? What's going to happen in Syria? How is it going to resolve itself? If you went to Syria in a restaurant, you would take that much cash just to have a meal, just like Venezuela. So why? And the MasterCard, Visa would never go because of the sanctions. So we told the central bank, why don't you guys do this? Why haven't you thought about these things? Allow people to use a central bank digital currency, or allow them to use cryptocurrencies to make payments and to transact in the society. So that's where we came from. We did the same thing in Africa, in Zambia specifically, with the central bank. Initially, everyone was resistant. Nowadays, everyone has white papers about it, and everyone's looking to implement. BIT now is doing the e-Naira pilot in Nigeria, one of the largest economies in Africa, one of the most populated countries in Africa. And it's just revolutionary because, developing world, mobile money with telecom companies has been very effective, yet central banks are very hesitant on using it, while the mobile money providers are creating a parallel economy, and they're printing their own mobile money, maybe MTN, Airtel, the equivalent of Verizon and AT&T of America, they're doing it. So why allow them to do it while the central bank is sitting at the sidelines and just watching other people do it? And that's what really motivated me. And we figured it would be a long stretch, but something that is doable, and we see it happening over and over. And the experience of Latin America and the Middle East is very unique, and we see them really changing things around and pushing that envelope, and we keep pushing the envelope.
Very interesting, and I'd love to come back to that a little bit as well on what's holding back that development. It seems inevitable, but would love to poke at some of the issues that are holding that back. Brock, we spoke a little bit on the outset. You mentioned the work that you're doing in El Salvador, and I know you and the Bitcoin Foundation have been working closely with El Salvador, which has become one of the first to accept Bitcoin. On September 7th, El Salvador enacted the Bitcoin law, allowing Bitcoin to be accepted as legal tender alongside the US dollar. This is a first globally. Can you explain for our audience, for the uninitiated, what's going on in El Salvador, what that initiative is about, what you're trying to do in El Salvador?
Well, the results are unbelievable. They achieved what I would say was my highest expectations. So September 7th is when the law took effect. By October 7th, a few days ago, half the population of the country downloaded a Bitcoin wallet. 70% of the population of El Salvador was unbanked. Within 1 month of it going live, half the population downloaded this Chivo wallet. I mean, this is empirical data that shows that this courageous move by President Bukele and the country of El Salvador works. That technology or innovation is the solution, at least to this global problem, which is the on or underbanked. 4 to 4.5 billion people on the planet are on or underbanked. A majority of the population of the world is unable to have that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. How can you ever expect to have a life of prosperity if you don't have the essential instruments or tools necessary to get there? Basic financial tools. And so El Salvador has proven that this idea of enabling innovation to create ubiquitous financial inclusion is real and it works. And so I'm excited for what's going to come. We're currently dealing within my group, my office, 33 different nation states right now and counting. I can't make it to all the presidents and governments around the world that are interested in this and want to know how they can implement it. If you follow what I can share publicly, obviously, I was just in Panama a couple of days ago, publicly with the president of Ecuador, the 2 former heads of the central bank, the current head of the central bank. I mean, you can follow where I am, and Ali, this is why it's worth talking about. But it's also worth mentioning that I'm one of the creators of the stablecoin, right? Founded Tether. We're doing roughly $100 billion a day in transactional volume, security tokens, all of these things. And so I'm very interested in a land trust, and obviously, Ali, I think of Medici Bank, the other Medici, Ed Boyle's here in the other room, the CEO of the other Medici, and obviously I'm an investor and good friends with Overstock's former CEO, Dr. Patrick Byrne, and I advise over at T0 and otherwise. But Ali, we have much to discuss. It's unbelievable the level of interest in the developing world right now to bring in visionary leadership, technology, and innovation. And historically, if you are on the forefront of change and you have game-changing technologies, products, or services, historically, those things always went to the first world first because they have the largest populations and the largest GDP. The team that I'm working with does not go to the first world first. We go to the nations that need it most for 2 reasons. One, because we're not motivated by money in the same way as our predecessors, this next generation of agents of change, but also because the barriers to entry are lower. You don't have the same incumbents vested interests that are protecting the status quo. Obviously, with El Salvador, Panama, Ecuador, they don't have a central bank that can issue currency. And so as a result of that, you don't have the same limitations. But it's not just limited to that. And throughout the Caribbean, I mean, Ali, I look forward to having the private conversations. I can't discuss what's going on beyond that, which you can find on my social media. But let's just say there's a lot going on.
So we'll dig into that a bit more too, I hope. But for now, let me challenge a little bit. Well, first of all, let me ask Brock, for the uninitiated folks who are listening right now, could you just explain a few bullets on what is happening in El Salvador? What is the significance of Bitcoin being accepted as legal tender alongside the U.S. dollar, again, as you mentioned, for a country that doesn't have its own central bank?
Well, I mean, again, prior to this happening, there was a lot of speculation, a lot of media narratives, one saying this is awesome, one saying this is horrible, but the results are the results. Within a month, half of the population of the country downloaded a Bitcoin wallet. That happened because the government incentivized it. The government announced that they were buying $150 billion to sit on the government balance sheet in the same way that they have gold reserves, right? And they offered every citizen of the country $30 worth of free Bitcoin if they download the wallet. So this was incentivized behavior. It didn't just happen automatically. The government bought Bitcoin and said, download this dollar Bitcoin wallet and you get $30 worth of free Bitcoin. But the fact that they were able to drive half the population in 30 days to adopt this system goes to show empirically that this works. Now, there's obviously, perfection is the enemy of progress. A lot of, unintended consequences. Some people are going to lose their money. Some people are going to get scammed. I mean, welcome to the process of change, right? Change is sometimes a bloody mess. But it's like they keep calling us the Wild West, right? The Wild West, the Wild West. But remember, the Wild West became California. And so you have to be able to see past the present moment and into the future and keep your eye on the prize. And the reality is that,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask. So what is the benefit of having Bitcoin? Let's just base level question. What is the benefit of having Bitcoin as an alternative currency of legal tender in Salvador beyond the US dollar? What benefits does it bring?
Well, so today, I believe the word cryptocurrency is a bit of a misnomer because it's not a very good currency. Stable coins are, because it's not a very good unit of account. It's not a very good medium of exchange. It's got a lot of volatility. And so in El Salvador, the Chivo wallet allows you to have your digital dollars as well as your Bitcoin. I equate your digital dollar as your checking or current account, your current account to buy your basic products and services, your milk and cookies. Your Bitcoin account is effectively your modern day savings account. It's where you take whatever excess resources that you've accumulated, however you've accumulated them, and park them in an account where long term, at least, it's been proven to appreciate. That doesn't mean that it will in the future, but so far that is the case. And I suspect it will continue to be the case for a variety of reasons. We've printed over $23 trillion in the last year and a half. I personally view hyperinflation as almost a certainty as a result of the consequences of operating a system, completely without accountability. And so that is what that is. And again, I ran for president of the United States last year. I'm not against any of the old systems, right? I'm not here to judge. I'm just someone that believes that we have to straddle the old and the new. Okay. This is my conversation with governments. It's like, we're not saying get rid of the old system, but you want to have the old economy working in parallel with the newer future economy. And you want to have a foot in both. That is logically the strategic move. You want to make sure that you have a presence in the future while still honoring the past, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can have this parallel system, and if the change is constant, you can't stop change, right? Yeah. The question is, are you going to be a beneficiary of it or a victim of it? That's the advice I give.
Maybe we could dig in a little bit to the rollout. In our Future of Money Power Map report, we talk about some of the hiccups in the El Salvador rollout. The Chivo e-wallet, which awarded $30 of Bitcoin to every citizen was glitchy at rollout. There have been connectivity issues. In fact, we report that only 45% of Salvadorans have online access, 10% in rural areas. So we're talking about very poor digital access in some of these regions. And the World Bank and the IMF are threatening to stop lending to El Salvador over this move. I'm just kind of curious how you think this is going in terms of that geopolitical framework and on the ground framework. Is this a strategy that's ripe for adoption in the Mideast and North Africa? And what are any cautionary lessons? Obviously, as you point out, when you're doing something new, there will be missteps. What do you think the implications are for the Mideast? We want to make sure we bring it back to the region.
Well, so two parts. Yes, it was not a perfect rollout, but keep in mind, the government rolled out and implemented this law in 90 days. I work in the startup world. I've never seen a government operate so entrepreneurially. The idea of putting this law into place and have it implemented and rolled out in 90 days, it was like a forced march in an area where they had no historic expertise. So of course things weren't perfect, but I'd say considering the time frame in which it was implemented, it's astounding. So it is what it is. Very entrepreneurial. In terms of the IMF and the World Bank, yes, I think that El Salvador doesn't get much money from them as compared to other countries. I think they were expecting 1.3 billion this year. And so it's just over $1 billion comes from those organizations on an annual basis to El Salvador in the forms of debt or loans. My view is in the same way that Mayor Suarez of Miami said, hey, Miami's the Bitcoin capital, we're the future capital of the United States. The economic development, the foreign direct investment into Miami from that statement has changed the fate, the future of Miami. $1.3 billion is what the World Bank and the IMF give to El Salvador. Their action, I suspect, is going to bring far more in the forms of foreign direct investment into El Salvador. It's bringing intellectual, social, and financial capital that exceeds that. And it's not in the form of debt. It's investment in the country that creates revenues that are taxable and sustainable. And so would you like a $1 billion loan, or would you like $10 billion of capital basically coming in long-term sustained that doesn't come in the form of debt? I'd say that as a betting man, that El Salvador is better off with the economic development that is coming as a result of these actions than taking on loans that come with a lot of strings and conditions.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's get back to the implications for other countries in the Mideast. Sandra, I would love to bring you into this conversation now, if you would. And I'd be very keen to know your thoughts on Bitcoin and other crypto vehicles as tools to help economies develop, as Brock mentions right now. Are they helping bridge the digital divide, or are they strengthening it?
So first of all, as a long-term crypto advocate from the corporate and banking sector, I am first to say that this asset class, as I called it many years earlier, is something that you can't ignore. However, I do actually agree with Brock that as a cryptocurrency, there are certain ones, particularly Bitcoin in particular, that are just not really good as a currency per se, which is why the CBDC discussion is actually very interesting, as well as the stablecoin discussion. However, I have a couple of things that I'd like to lay out that I see as potentially problematic, and why I spend my time, and the GVBC spends its time as a Swiss nonprofit, trying to build bridges. I think it's wonderful to see the innovation that's going on in various countries and various places where, frankly, you're right, there are not good financial systems in place. There are not governments that are resilient and doing the right thing. So yes, there should be alternatives. However, we live in a globally interconnected world. And as a former banker sitting in London and watching the financial system almost break completely, I can see why alternatives are being looked at. But likewise, we could end up making the same mistakes if we don't build the bridges that we need to working with. And I'm going to give an example here. I'm working with the Islamic Development Bank right now. I was just in Uzbekistan with many of the world leaders representing the 57 countries that sit under the Islamic Development Bank. They are just beginning to really delve into the implications of CBDCs, as well as having potentially crypto play a role. These discussions may take longer than people would like who sit on the entrepreneurial side, but also these people or experts who've watched the evolution of these countries and these systems also have something to bring to the table. So what we need to do better is marry the entrepreneurs who know how to build the tech with the folks who actually understand the government policy side and find the commonalities. Don't get me wrong, there will always be frictions at certain level, but there's also benefits to be had when we all work together, because I would rather have a pan 57 country sort of access point, meaning some sort of token that works across all 57 countries to scale. To me, that would build resiliency as opposed to 57 individual CBDCs or equivalent.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd love to dig into your work with the Islamic Development Bank and the Mideast generally, and the opportunity for crypto when it comes to the Mideast, and specifically around, maybe we could dig into Sharia compliance for a moment. What benefits do crypto bring when it comes to Sharia and youth in the region?
Absolutely. One of my favorite topics, Andrew. Thank you for bringing it up. I love the demographics in the whole MENA region. If you think about, including Central Asia, you think about how many majority of the population are under the age of 25. They are rapidly and actively adopters of any kind of digital, and they are often unbanked because, from what I hear when I was in Uzbekistan, 90% of that population is not banked because the banks themselves do not offer Sharia compliant solutions. And so what the fintech companies are doing, they're marrying the equivalent of PayPal meets Klarna meets crypto, which I think is very, very cool. And that's starting to crop up all over Central Asia, but also into the Middle East as well. And so I think we're going to see some really cool innovations happening purely because of the demographics and also the lack of Sharia compliant solutions. And as we see that area grow, I think we're going to see the prevalence of that going across not only the Middle East, but the entire region into any predominantly Islamic country.
Fascinating. So we see the youth as a driver for Sharia compliant solutions, cool tech that provides Sharia compliant solutions. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. Ali, I wanted to get back to Medici. We were talking about, and Sandra actually mentioned, working entrepreneurs, building technology that helps, and with government, working in concert with government. That is your breadbasket. So I would love, and I promise to get back to Medici, and we're going to move a little bit away from crypto and more into the blockchain right now and talk a little bit about what Medici is doing. It's really fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit about your business and how it's impacting land ownership rights and finance in globally as well as specifically in the region?
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. So, I mean, this is something close to my heart. Medici Land Governance is a public benefit corporation, and we started off doing pilots closely with the World Bank, starting off in Zambia and Rwanda. And our approach has been not just people are unbanked. 5 out of 7 billion people don't own their property, not just unbanked. And the approach has been, let's go and work closely with governments. Let's figure out with governments what is the need and how can we empower people by giving them property rights to their homes and properties. And we've done that in a way that is an efficient way where we're using emerging technologies. In this case, blockchain and artificial intelligence and machine learning go hand in hand to make sure that the system works and the system is deployed top down. And MLG has, for example, over 300 employees in Zambia working closely to so far to have enumerated over 200,000 properties in the past year or so. So we've knocked on 200,000 doors and collected data from people to give them titles to their property. And I'll give you an example. There was change in government in Zambia about in August, and about a month ago, somebody went in and deleted all the land records of politicians that was there to make sure that nobody goes after them and what they own as property. If they had a blockchain-based land administration system that we're working on right now, if that technology was deployed, then they wouldn't have that problem where somebody would be deleting those records. And in the case of, if you think of corruption, deed fraud, our work in our pilot in New York and others is really focused on, either people that are vulnerable or people that are elderly that are being taken, their homes being taken away from them and their properties being taken away from them. And how does that apply to the Middle East? I mean, the Middle East, if you look at conflict resolution, I mean, MLG is now working closely with the Palestinian Authority to look at empowering the citizens there and securing land rights within Palestine. We've worked on a border conflict resolution between Congo and Zambia on mapping that border. So technology does work, as Brock has said, as Sandra reiterates. It's really how you apply that technology and how effective it is when it comes to empowering people. That same technology could be lethal, same technology could be very beneficial. If done right, our views at Medici Land Governance is work closely with governments, get their support, get their blessings, and then you can deploy and apply that technology efficiently at low cost to the benefit of people. And we look forward to expanding our projects into the Middle East, not just in Zambia and Rwanda and Liberia on the African continent.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm kind of curious. I have a bunch of questions for you, but I first want to remind our audience, please do submit questions for our panelists, comments. We welcome your questions, but I have a few questions for you around why ownership rights. Why for land? Why is that specifically an important element? Obviously, in conflicts around land and property, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. But I'm just kind of curious, for Medici, as an application of blockchain, what's the relevance for finance and economic freedom that securing those land rights brings to the citizenry? I'd really be interested for your explanation of that.
Absolutely. So very simply put, I mean, it's all about the chicken and the egg. You can't really borrow money from the bank unless you have a title deed. You can't get a title deed unless you have money to get it to borrow money from the bank. So we solved that problem by going and just making sure that we're securing those land rights, issuing those title deeds, and then people can go borrow money from the bank. The property, the value of the property goes up, because all of a sudden now they have a property that has title, 99-year in the case of a leasehold in Zambia. In other places, it's a freehold. In other countries, depending on the system. But all of a sudden, that person has a legitimate title that is bankable. So not just being unbanked, like Brock said, or Sandra, people that are unbanked and they have no property to show for is even worse. So imagine now you have a property that you could sell and you could add literally a zero, if not 2 zeros, to your property value because you can sell it. At the same time, it's a mechanism in place where you can work on planning. MLG doesn't stop at issuing title deeds. We work on simplified planning for peri-urban areas and surrounding every city that we work in. And then the way a lot of these areas that have grown, specifically, like I'll give you the example of Lusaka, a lot of the settlements around the city were never planned. So we work closely with the city council here and the government to plan 33 areas within the city to make sure that there are road reserves and whatnot, and people have their title that they can think down the road, how does that translate into ownership? And today I see it, and I see people receiving their title and going literally to the bank and getting a loan. If they don't get a loan, they can at least secure a loan from a friend or a cousin. Otherwise, they know that they can now freely give that property to their parents, to their children, or to their grandchildren, and they feel good about it. At the same time, Medici also thinks about what we're working towards: women's rights. Property ownership. Since MLG has started our project, we have now part of as a public benefit, and part of our motto is to make sure that it's 50% ownership of women, and we see that happening over and over again, where the record showed before it was under 20%, and now we're at 50% registration for ownership of women. And as we know, when women own property, that translates into better well-being for children, statistically speaking.
So I mean, it just seems like it's at the nexus, property ownership and rights, land rights, of so much economic growth and potential for lots of different people. Thank you for explaining. The questions are coming in, a few to field right now. Back to you, Ali, on this. Joshua Curtis is curious, based on your experience using blockchain to secure land rights in the region, about the potential for blockchain to more broadly protect rule of law and election outcomes against authoritarian overreach. Is this possible? And is the real, the chief threat to land rights ultimately not be whether a right exists on paper in the blockchain, but whether the government cares? And you're working with a lot of governments right now. You must be a very patient man. What do you say to Joshua?
I say yes. I say a lot of authoritarian regimes. I mean, I would say look at conflict. About 33 different conflicts happened in Africa because of dispute of land and border disputes. If we can solve those issues just to begin with, then intra-country wars would not be a problem. I mean, we work on adjudication between people and demarcating areas and ownership between different and delineating borders between properties, and we do that all the time. And we see when people fight and how you can get a conflict resolution. Imagine that being done on a country level, and imagine what happened, for example, in Libya today, where all the land records for the last 9 years have not been registered and properties have been informally registered. So same goes with Syria. In a lot of the regions in Syria, in the outskirts of Aleppo and on the northeastern Syrian areas, a lot of those records disappeared, no longer exist. And people of minorities, Christian minorities, Kurdish minorities, Alawite minorities have lost their properties, and they don't have, if they haven't taken their title deed with them, someone else has already occupied their homes. So it applies everywhere. And if you have that on blockchain and the government is okay with it, who comes to power, your right is secure.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. Another question from Carol Wazalewski, and Sandra, maybe you could take this one. Some Mideast countries, Turkey, for example, and some non-Mideast countries, by the way, like China, try to block cryptocurrencies from local markets and investing instead in their national digital currencies. Is this trend viable in the long term, and what are the main risks here? You talked about earlier, 57 different currencies out there will not create a unified market. Kind of curious on your views.
So I want to start from a position of options for the person, right? For the people. The more viable options there are, we live in a better world, and people should be able to choose. And so when countries block different types of cryptocurrencies, I think ultimately long-term, they need to get to a place where they're not using a blunt tool, AKA banning everything because they don't understand it or they see it as a threat. I think ultimately, there are frictions. There are definitely frictions today. Some countries want their CBDC or their digital equivalent to prevail over alternatives. And we're going to continue to see that. Long term, I hope we see a dynamic where the masses overrule the individual, meaning in the sense that if an entire population would like to see alternative ways to invest and exchange medium value in a digital economy, then that should be allowed. Obviously with guardrails, but it should be allowed. So I believe in choice, and the more freedom around choices, the better. But we will continue to see frictions for a very long time.
Brock, would you like to add to that?
Definitely will second freedom and choice. And yes, clearly there's going to be friction between the old and the new. And our job, and everyone clearly in this group, is doing that is to build bridges, because it's human nature to fear that which we don't understand, right? And the way that you conquer fear is with knowledge. Let's continue to provide people with the information necessary to get comfortable with the road ahead. In terms of elections, which was your last thing, in the presidential election last year, in the United States of America, you were permitted to vote using blockchain technology in Utah County, Utah. The first ever vote in a presidential election ever was a vote for me in the presidential elections in the United States of America. If it's already happening in the US, this is clearly going to be a technology that is going to be utilized around the world, so that we know that we have fair and equal elections going forward. This is absolutely going to happen, as we're going to continue to see in the way that we transfer title of land or otherwise systems of governance. I definitely recommend, for those that are big fans of governance, to go take a look at what's called the Eden, like the Garden of Eden operating system. The Eden operating system is a really interesting tool where I think you're seeing the most advanced forms of elections occurring right now. This is not in the case of a government election, but something related to blockchain, but definitely worth checking out. And I'm really just honored to be here, and I want to give a shout out to Dubai. What's happening in the UAE. And remember, the fortune or the future favors the bold.
Great.
And Dubai has clearly done extraordinary things in terms of how they're looking to use blockchain technology to make sure that they're the smartest city in the future. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Brock. Great to have you here. And one last question for you, Ali, before you go. I want to answer, if you could answer this question for Jonathan Crisp. Which blockchain are you using at MLG? Which is the best blockchain?
I mean, there's no best blockchain. There's, there's the government, the private blockchain. I mean, private or public, depending on what you're using. In our case, we went for Flow, and we're looking at Ravencoin and other blockchains as well. Really, it depends on the government and how comfortable they are with records going public or not.
Great. I think that is what we'll have time for today, and about a really fascinating discussion that could go on much longer, I know. So we'll have to do a part 2 to this. I wanted to thank you, Ali, and thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Brock, for your excellent insights over the past 45 minutes, and to our audience for tuning in and sending in your questions. We'll close now and rejoin shortly for the next panel on economic diversification and workforce transformation at 11:10. Please do tune back in then. And thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it.